Well, can you believe it's only a couple weeks from Christmas? Does it seem like Christmas comes earlier every year? Yeah. So does everything. Birthdays come earlier. Everything comes earlier. I've got my own theory as to why that is. I think, when you're 3 years old, a year is a long time because a year is a third of your life. And the older you get, that year is, a smaller percentage of the life you've already lived. So I think that's why things start. I mean, it's also, we're busier and that kind of stuff. I understand it, but I think it's because we're basing history on, the short time. But we're only a few weeks away for Christmas. So for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do a short Christmas series that I've titled Birth Announcements. We're going to look at a few of the announcements that were given to let people know that Jesus was coming or that he had come. More specifically, though, we're going to look at their responses to those announcements. I get a kick out of seeing the various ways that people come up with to announce that they are expecting a baby. But no matter how it's announced, hearing someone else is expecting pales in comparison to what someone feels when they find out that they are expecting a baby. And by the way, in case you missed it, here is a birth announcement that was given just a few weeks ago. If you have Facebook, you saw that, but I know some of you don't. So yes, that is my grandson, Keaton, and they are announcing that there is another baby on the way in June. And no, Keaton is not really sad. He did a really good job posing for that picture. He's not really sad. He's actually very, very excited that he is going to be a big brother. And of course, Grandma and Grandpa are excited, and Mom and Dad are excited, and Aunt and Uncle are excited, and most of you are excited. A few might be saying, great, one more kid toddling around the place making noise. But I love the excitement of kids. We need more kids. So some of you, I know some of you are done, but let's have kids. Let's fill this place with energy. Sometimes the official announcement by the doctor that a baby is on its way is an answer to prayer, and there's great rejoicing. At other times, the announcement is received with shock or bewilderment. There are times when you almost want to get a second opinion. That's impossible. Are you sure? The title of today's message is Surprise. You're going to have a baby. All week as I've been preparing the message, I've had a scene from Father of the Bride 2 going through my mind. Now, I would have loved to have shown the clip this morning, but one of the problems we have with streaming online, although we have the rights to show video clips as part of the message, we don't have the rights to stream those out. So we would have to cut the clips out and just have a dead space for our online streaming. But I think enough of you have seen it. You know what scene. As soon as I said that, you know what I'm talking about. For those that don't, let me just give you a little bit background. This is the second Father of the Bride installment, not the old black and white. This is the new one with Steve Martin. And in the first movie, they just married off their daughter. Their son is entering his teenage years, and they are looking forward to being empty nesters. But Nina starts having some medical issues, so she goes into the doctor to get some tests done to find out what's wrong with her, and the doctor calls them back in and says, I need to talk to you, and they're fearing the worst. They're fearing cancer or something else, and instead they sit down, and the doctor just looks across the desk and says, George, Nina, you're going to have a baby. Maybe some of you have experienced something like that in your own family. The announcement is not always initially received with joy. Then there are times when the announcement brings joy, but the joy takes a while to surface because it's surrounded by disbelief, or puzzlement. Mindy and I tried for 10 years to have a baby, and it wasn't happening. We both went in for testing to find out whose fault is it? Is it my fault? Is it her fault? Why are we not having a baby? And the doctor finally came to the conclusion that Mindy was not ovulating, at least not on a regular basis. We tried various fertility drugs. We tried various techniques that people said, hey, if you try this, this will work. If you eat this, this will work. Nothing was working. So we finally resolved ourselves to the fact that it wasn't in the cards for us to have a baby of our own. Long story short, we found out about a baby that needed to be adopted. So we decided we would adopt this baby, and part of the process for adoption is you have to go in for physicals. They want to make sure that you're physically fit, you're going to be able to take care of this child you're adopting. So Mindy went in for her physical, and the doctor, who's the same doctor who's been with us through this whole journey over the 10 years, the same doctor that told her she doesn't ovulate, and we're probably never going to have kids of our own, after doing all this stuff, it came in and he had this puzzled look on his face, and he said, I think you might be pregnant. we need to do some more tests. So we did a couple more tests and came back and he said, congratulations, you're going to have a baby. And while that was great news for us, at the same time we're going, how could this be? This is not possible. But yes, it was possible. So it can bring joy, but it's still a surprise. Let's all try to put ourselves in Mary and Joseph's shoes this morning. When they heard the words, surprise, now this isn't the exact words from the Bible translation, but surprise, you're going to have a baby. It would have been a real shock. There was no physical way that what they were hearing was true. There were other people that had heard these words with an improbability. Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a son. That was an improbability because of their age, and they even told God, at our age, this doesn't normally happen. But it wasn't an impossibility. Even Zechariah and Elizabeth, Mary's aunt and uncle, had heard those words. You're going to have a son. Name him John. They were in the same boat as Abraham and Sarah. It was an improbability at their age, and they had been trying their whole lives, but they were beyond childbearing years as far as medical science says. So it was a surprise, but it wasn't an impossibility. With Mary and Joseph, it wasn't just improbable, it was impossible. Now, we need to understand that before Gabriel came to Mary, she really wasn't anything spectacular. She was an ordinary young Jewish girl living in a small Jewish town. From all outward appearances, she was just like all the other young girls in her town. I'm sure Mary would have been perfectly happy remaining a normal Jewish girl, living a normal Jewish life. She had the same dreams that all other young girls have. Fall in love, settle down, get married, and eventually have a family. But God stepped in and everything changed. So we're going to look at the story in Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 26. It says, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, that's her Aunt Elizabeth, because the previous chapter talked about the angel coming to Zechariah as he was ministering in the temple and announcing to Zechariah that they were going to give birth to a boy that they were named John, who became John the Baptist, and his job was to prepare the way for the Messiah. Okay, so in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Gabriel appeared to her and said, greetings, favored woman. The Lord is with you. Confused and disturbed. Now, why would she be confused and disturbed at this point? Because she didn't know that she was highly favored. She was just a normal girl. She had never done anything spectacular. And the angel says, you are highly favored. Mary tried to think about what the angel could mean. Don't be afraid, Mary, the angel told her, for you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over Israel forever. His kingdom will never end. Mary asked the angel, but how can this be? I am a virgin. I mean, that doesn't happen. It's an impossibility. And the angel replied, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the baby to be born will be holy, and he will be called the Son of God. What's more, your relative Elizabeth has become pregnant in her old age. So, that was a supposed impossibility, but it happened. This one is a complete impossibility, but still with God, nothing is impossible. People used to say she was barren, but she has conceived a son and is now in her 6th month. For the word of God will never fail. Now listen to Mary's response. Mary responded, I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true. And then the angel left her. What's Mary thinking in this moment? What is she feeling? We've heard this story so many times that we almost just think about it as being a normal thing. Yeah, that's just what happened. But this story is far from normal. People don't just randomly end up pregnant, especially virgins. Mary's not the only unwed teenager to find out that she's pregnant. But the story is completely different than any other teen pregnancy. For other girls, although it might come as a shock, there was probably already a nagging feeling in the back of their mind. I wonder if. Today we read the announcement by the angel as good news. The best news ever. And it was. But in the moment, Mary probably isn't thinking that. Although she may be excited, and you know how many young girls grow up hearing the story in Sunday school say, I would have loved to have been Mary? It sounds exciting, but it's really not as exciting as it sounds. Although she accepts the responsibility, she's fearful. I think that's why the angel said, don't be afraid. It wasn't just that she's got an angel standing in front of her, but the angel knows that the news that he's about to give could be fearful news. So he says, don't be afraid. This is all God's plan. She's fearful, wondering why her, and wondering how in the world could this even be possible. Now we know that for a fact because she asked the angel, how could this be? Valid question. We don't understand it, but God does. And even though she responds, I am the Lord's servant, may everything you have said about me come true, she's got to still be trying to make sense of it. Okay, you said it, I believe God, but I still don't believe it. I mean, have you ever had those situations where I believe, but I don't believe? I mean, even one of the disciples said to Jesus one time, I have faith, but help me with my unbelief, because our faith can always be more than what it is. At first, the honor of being chosen and knowing that she had found favor with God may have overshadowed the reality of the announcement. But as she continued to process everything, at some point, the realization finally hit her. Oh no. I have to tell my parents. I have to tell Joseph. What are they going to think? And I wish the Bible recorded those conversations, don't you? Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant. But don't worry, I didn't do anything wrong. You see, there was this angel. Talk about an awkward family dinner. And then there's Joseph. Let's pick up the story in Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18. This is how Jesus, the Messiah, was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, to whom she was engaged, was a righteous man and did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly. Now let's stop here for a moment. How long did it take Joseph to find out? Did Mary tell Joseph immediately? Did she run straight from her encounter with the angel and tell Joseph, Joseph, I got great news. This is what just happened. This angel appeared to me. Or did he find out through the grapevine? Did he find out when it became impossible for her to hide the pregnancy anymore? Did she tell him on her own? Or did somebody else spill the beans? We always assume that the reason Joseph wanted to break the engagement was because he didn't believe Mary's story. I mean, it is an impossibility. And what would you think if your fiance came and said, I'm carrying a baby and it's not yours, but it's not any other man's either. It belongs to God. What would you think? We assume that the reason he wanted to break off the engagement was because he didn't believe her story. But as I spent many, many hours researching this and researching the culture and researching the background, because there's so much that's not in here. I wish I knew the rest of the story, but I want to give you another possibility. That can just stay. That's just my announcements. I don't need those. I've already done them. So that can, unless you want to write on it or something. But thank you. I want to give you another distinct possibility as to why Joseph wanted to call off the engagement. And I believe, as I've been doing my research, I can't prove it. I don't know for sure, but I really believe this could be the reason. It's possible that he had full trust in Mary. And he actually believed that the angel had spoken to her and that she would be the mother of the Messiah. But did you notice the angel's announcement to Mary didn't mention Joseph? The angel didn't say, you are going to carry God's son and you and Joseph are going to raise this child together. Joseph was not mentioned in that announcement. Mary and Joseph could have both assumed that if what the angel was true, she needed to remain unattached to anyone here on earth. Because as the father of her son, she would in a way have God as her husband. And to be married to two men at the same time would be unacceptable. Or Joseph may have had reservations about trying to raise the Son of God. He said, Mary, this is great news for you. You are highly favored. This is a great honor. Any other Jewish girl would love to be the mother of God's child, but I can't take that responsibility. I mean, guys, think about that. Can you imagine being the earthly father for the Son of God? A few of you have to work out relationships with other fathers anyway. You're in a second marriage and you're helping raise a child that's not really yours. And if the other father doesn't like something that you've done in discipline or something that you've done for their child or doesn't think you've given that child enough, you're already feeling like you've got to answer to them. What if you offended God in some way? You didn't do something that you should have done to properly care for his son. Or you disciplined him and God didn't like the discipline that you gave him. Which brings a question. Do you think Jesus ever got disciplined? I don't know. He was a child. He was a normal child. Who in their right mind would want that responsibility? There are so many things the Bible isn't clear about. So we don't know exactly the chronology of events or exactly what has been going through the minds of Mary and Joseph. But what we do know is Joseph was planning to call off the relationship. Some translations say he planned to divorce her quietly. So were they engaged or were they married? We go back to the story in Luke on the night that he was born. It talks about Mary and Joseph traveling to Bethlehem, and it talks about them being engaged. So why do some translations say he wanted to divorce her secretly or divorce her privately? To really understand what's going on, we need to understand how Jewish weddings worked. The proper term for this point of relationship wasn't engagement, it was betrothal. At this point, Mary and Joseph were betrothed to each other. In other words, they had already made vows in front of their families, and they had pledged their love for each other. As far as society and the law was concerned, they were married. They just hadn't consummated the marriage yet. Mary would have still been living with her family, while Joseph finished whatever agreement had been arranged with her father. Usually part of that agreement had to do with how much money the groom was going to give to the bride's father for the privilege of marrying his daughter. Dads, don't you wish somebody would pay you for your daughter? Normally, the betrothal period would last approximately a year, but it could be shorter, it could be longer, depending on what kind of arrangements were made. Sometimes it would also be, I'd love you to have my daughter, but she's not going to live in that shack with you. You've got to build a nicer place for her, which kind of goes into the whole story of Jesus going to prepare a place for us and all that kind of stuff, trying to get the place ready so he can accept his bride. So there's so many illustrations there when you understand Jewish ceremonies and how they work. There's so many things that carry over and help us understand so much more of what the Bible has to say. The two fathers, or the groom and the bride's father, had made an agreement. These two will be married. They were already considered husband and wife, but the rest of the ceremony had not yet taken place. Now you remember, Jacob had to work for Laban for 7 years before he was allowed to claim his bride. The arrangement was, you can marry my daughter, but you have to work for 7 years. That's the period they're going through. They were already considered married. They just were not living together and were forbidden to have relations with each other. They were also forbidden to have romantic relationships with other people and forbidden to consummate the marriage until obligations had been met. Once all the requirements were met, the groom could then claim his wife and she would be able to come live with him. And that usually involved another ceremony. He would bring them, they'd come, they'd have this big party. Sometime during the party, the bride and groom would slip away to consummate the marriage and then come back and everybody rejoice. It's now a completed process. If either of them had broken the promise to remain faithful, it was considered adultery. And adultery was punished by a public stoning of the individual that had committed adultery. If Mary had been unfaithful, the law said she must be put to death because she has violated her vows to her family, to Joseph, and to God. She has been unfaithful. Even though they were not yet married, it was considered marriage. She had committed adultery, and she should be put to death. Now, Matthew tells us clearly that Joseph was a righteous man. The word righteous means that he followed the Mosaic law religiously and would never do anything deliberately to violate the law. So if he believed that Mary had committed adultery, he would have been obligated to expose her and put her to shame by saying she committed adultery. That is what a righteous man does. He says, I don't like this, but this is what the law says. Mary, I'm sorry, but you were unfaithful. I've got to be a man, a righteous man. I have to expose your sin. That's why I believe Joseph believed Mary's story. Because to be a righteous man, he wouldn't be righteous if he let sin slip under the carpet. However, not being sure that he's prepared to be the earthly father for the Christ child, or even that he's supposed to be part of the plan since he was not mentioned when the angel talked to Mary, he does the only thing he can legally do to remove himself from the situation without hurting her. He decides to divorce her. Now again, I can't prove any of this. This is just as I've studied it. This is just another way to think about it. How many of you have ever thought about the story this way before? I always want to open your eyes to other possibilities. The story is not as clean as we think it is. There's so many different caveats that we don't know. Now remember, as long as the law is concerned, they are already legally married. And the only way he can dissolve the relationship is to expose her for adultery, which would disgrace her, or to divorce her. In those days, it was pretty easy for a man to get a divorce. All he had to do was give her a note that said, I divorce you. That's all it was. No attorneys, no nothing. They just wrote a note. I no longer want to be married. Here, you're divorced. They didn't have to have a reason for it. They didn't have to explain why. Just, I don't want to be your husband anymore. I don't want you to be my wife anymore. It would have been really easy. But by doing so, everyone would assume that the child was his. And he would be viewed as what we now call a deadbeat dad. Because he's not taking responsibility for his own child. His choices are claim that she's being unfaithful, she's put to death. Or walk away because he's not sure he can handle the responsibility, or because he's not sure he's supposed to be part of the equation, divorce her. She now has to raise the child on her own, but as far as society is concerned, he's not taking responsibility for his own child. Either way you look at it, the decision wasn't an easy one for Joseph. Like Mary, he had his whole life planned out. This was not part of his plan. He wasn't prepared for Mary to say, surprise, I'm going to have a baby. So he decides to let Mary go and fulfill God's plan for her life without him. Now let's pick up the story. Verse 20 of chapter 1. As he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, For the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All of a sudden, the angel's saying, you're part of the story. This isn't just something with Mary. See, I found favor with both of you because I know you were together. Mary will be the mother, but you will be the earthly father. This is my plan for you. Jump down to verse 24. When Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took Mary as his wife, but he did not have sexual relations with her until her son was born. And Joseph named him Jesus. Very few people knew the truth about who Jesus was. Mary and Joseph's friends thought that Jesus was actually Joseph's sons. The Bible clearly states that when Jesus began his ministry, was performing miracles, people found it hard to believe because they knew Jesus as the carpenter's son. How could this man know these things? How could this man do these things? We know his father. His father is Joseph. Joseph's just a carpenter. Where did he learn all this stuff? Most people didn't know who Jesus' real father was because Joseph said, I will raise him as if he's my son. I will take the responsibility for God's son here on earth. It wasn't the way I planned my life. It wasn't my dreams for myself. But I will place myself into God's plans. I will submit, just like Mary said, let it be done to me as you have said. Joseph said, okay, God, my plans don't matter. What are your plans? I submit to your will for my life. It's possible that even Mary's family thought that Joseph had been impatient and claimed his bride prematurely. I doubt that the angel told either Mary or Joseph about the hardships that they would have to endure in the years to come. I think they knew it was going to be difficult. But they said, whatever happens, we're willing to do it because this is God's will for us. The decree for taxation had not yet been given. They didn't know that they would have to make the long journey to Bethlehem while Mary was experiencing labor pains. They didn't know that they would be forced to place the baby in a manger or that they wouldn't be able to return to family for many years because they would have to flee to Egypt to get away from an angry Herod. I doubt if Mary really understood what would happen 33 years later. She didn't know that she would watch her son beaten and nailed to a cross. I mean, there were prophecies that she could have kind of figured that out, but I don't think she really truly understood what that would really be like. She knew that she might be ostracized. She knew that she might be a castaway from some of her people. She knew that her life was going to be different. It wasn't going to be the life she planned, but I don't think she really saw all these things. But she said, whatever your will is, I submit. I am willing to be a part of your plan. Were they scared? You bet they were. Why do you think the first thing the angel said to both of them was, don't be afraid? They didn't know what the future would hold, but they trusted God and said, I am the Lord's servant. May the Lord's will, not my will. What did Jesus pray on the cross or before the cross? Not my will, but yours be done. I've got my own plans. I've got the way I'd like things to be. This is, if I had my preference, it would be this way. But God, it's not about me. It's about you. What do you want for my life? May the Lord's will be done through me. What do we do when life doesn't turn out the way we planned? What do we do when the unexpected happens? What do we do when God interrupts our perfect world and says, surprise? Now, maybe it's not surprise you're going to have a baby. But what if God says, surprise, you've got cancer? Surprise, you just lost the job that you've had for 30 years. Surprise! But God, that's not my plan. That's not what I've been working for. God, that's not. We may not know what's going to happen. Now, sometimes we get into situations that we have actually created ourselves. There is a difference. Okay, there are some things that happen to us that we can't just say, okay, God, I know this is your will for me. Sometimes God says, no, you know what? You kind of created this mess. But there are times when we had nothing to do with it. It's just out of the blue. Surprise! And it puts our life on hold. Everything changes. What do we do in those situations? Are we like Mary and Joseph? Do we say, okay, that wasn't my idea. That wasn't my plan. But that's okay because I trust you. You are God. And if that's what you have for me, I willingly step into that, knowing that there's going to be pain, knowing that there's going to be hardship, but also knowing that you will be with me every step of the way. And you'll warn me and keep me out of any real danger, because the angel came to Joseph and said, you need to flee to Egypt. Joseph wouldn't have known that without God intervening. But God said, no, I'm going to protect you. I put you in this situation. You're following me, so I am going to continue to protect you. Now, that means you're going to have to be away from your family for longer. It means you're going to have to go to a place you've never been, establish new relationships, open a new carpenter shop. But I will provide through the situation. The Bible doesn't mention it, but I believe that on some of the worst and hardest days of Mary and Joseph's lives, when everything seemed to be working against them, they looked at Jesus and they remembered the miracle that took place for him to even be there. It was an impossibility. That doesn't happen. And they remembered, you know what? This baby's not possible, humanly speaking. But with God, all things are possible. They're facing a situation. And they say, I don't have a plan. I don't know how to solve this problem. This is humanly impossible. But we're looking at a miracle right here. And if God can do that, God can do this. And they'd remember what the words of the angel. Don't be afraid. God's got it all under control. I added a little bit there. As much as we want to be in control, there will always be things that will interrupt our plans. Often those interruptions will come from God. Are we willing to accept whatever God brings to us, even when those things will be difficult? It would have been a lot easier if God promised Mary and Joseph a nice home with servants, a nanny. Hey, you're going to be taking care of my son, but that's okay because I'm going to provide a house for you that you don't have to build. I'm going to provide servants to take care of you, and I'm going to provide an angel to be a nanny for my child. Wouldn't that have been a lot easier? But no, God said, here he is. You take care of him for me. But they accepted God's will, even though they knew it would make their own lives difficult. Their life wasn't easy, but it was blessed because they were right in the middle of God's plan for them. You see, the Christmas story isn't as sweet and simple as we usually believe it to be. It was messy. It was complicated. But God was at work through the mess and the complications. Mary and Joseph didn't know from day to day what the next day would bring. But God did. And God always provided. And it's scary. You know what? It's also exciting to live by faith. When we don't know, when we can't do it on our own, and we just have to put our full trust in God and say, you know what? God knows what I need, and God has it, and I'm just going to trust him, and he's going to take care of it. It's scary. But it's also great. God is you. I'm going to stay in your plan and let you do what only you can do. It wasn't always the way Mary and Joseph would have planned, but it all worked out according to God's plan. And because they were obedient, because they submitted, because they said, this is not the life that we had planned, but yes, we submit to your plan, it's affected the world for over 2,000 years. What if Mary and Joseph had said, God, not me. You got the wrong person. Find somebody else. What if they had refused because it was going to be difficult? But they said, we submit. And because of their submission to God, we're here this morning. There are things in life that take us by surprise, but none of them take God by surprise. We don't have to have it all figured out. Mary did ask, how can this be? I mean, that's a good question to ask, right? How could this be? But you notice she didn't ask, so God, who's going to take care of this baby? How am I going to raise this baby alone? Thought she would be raising the baby alone when she said that. But she didn't say, how this? She just said, God, if that's your plan, I trust you. I still don't understand how this could be, but I trust you to take care of all the other details. All we have to do is submit to God and allow Him to direct us one step at a time. We don't need to be afraid because God will be with us. That's the promise He made to His disciples before He left earth. He said, lo, I am with you always. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think that comes in the same passage where He said, in this life you will have trouble. But don't sweat it. Don't worry about it. Because if you're in my will, even though that trouble will come, I'm there with you. I'm walking through the fire with you. I'm walking through the valley with you. Don't be afraid because I am with you. And if we're walking with God and we are participating in His plan, the outcome is up to Him, not up to us. If I try to take matters into my own hand and I try to figure it out on my own, something's probably going to go wrong. But if I let God figure it out, it's always going to go right.